Pulling the trigger. Gun safety laws are now in effect in New York, and it's causing some confusion among gun owners. We're going to break down what will and won't be changing for current gun owners, prospective buyers, and the rest of New York. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I am Solomon Syed in Albany. Well, after months of legal back and forth, new gun laws taking effect here in New York. Some of the biggest changes are coming for those who wish to obtain or maintain their concealed carry permits. Under that new law, an applicant must complete a 16-hour classroom course and 2 hours of live firearm safety training. They would also need to provide character references and a list of social media accounts. Lastly, an in-person interview is required before your local or county law enforcement approves the application. Now, if you already have a concealed carry permit issued in an upstate New York county, you will not have to recertify and take that new course right now. However, if you are looking to keep it in New York City, Westchester, Nassau, and Suffolk counties, you will have to do so.
We'll be the first state to require training for firearm permits, but it makes sense. Under the old laws, some counties required, but many did not. So it's time to standardize this across the state of New York.
To break down more of the big changes, we are joined by Peter Polano, a partner with Tully Rinke's Rochester office, specializing in criminal defense law. Peter, we appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us. All right, Peter, on the surface, the concealed carry requirements, they seem more restrictive, but in theory, doesn't this open up the opportunity for many more New Yorkers to get these concealed carry permits than in the past?
Oh, I think it does, or at least it doesn't change the opportunities that New Yorkers will have. Certainly, the changes to the statute were coming after the Supreme Court had given some guidance. I think based on the Supreme Court's decision earlier this year, more New Yorkers should have access. I think that was pretty clear, or should have a concealed carry permit. I think that was pretty clear from the Supreme Court, and I think that's what will happen going forward, even with the sort of ramped up requirements that this legislation adds in.
Speak a little bit more about that, because we have heard from folks who do own guns, who are part of that advocacy group that believe that this is going to stifle Second Amendment rights. But the Supreme Court essentially struck down the proper cause requirement, saying that it was too restrictive because it was vague. You could come up with any number of reasons to deny one of these permits. It would seem on its face that with these new requirements, even though they are strict and there are some hoops and plenty of them that you have to jump through, if you do meet those requirements, you complete the 16-hour course, you do the 2 hours of firearm training, in-depth training, you pass the test, which I believe is 80% or better on a written test, then unless something else goes awry, you will be granted one of these concealed carry permits.
Yeah, that is, I think, the positive side of the legislation. The Supreme Court had problems with the subjective nature of it before. It was subjective. It was sort of written right into the law. Things weren't defined, and those were what were pointed out with the earlier decision. This legislation arguably makes it more objective, more uniform across the state, and there's certainly hoops to jump through. We'll have to see how many of those are challenged, how many of those are actually upheld, but they're the same hoops for everybody in the state, and some of the subjective components have been removed by the legislation.
Peter, that's a perfect segue, because these concealed carry requirements, they have already faced a lawsuit, the judge in that case not willing to grant an injunction to hold up the law, so it has taken effect. Do you foresee, and you kind of alluded to this, any continued challenges to this law, given the Supreme Court, of course, as we said, tossed out the proper cause requirement in the past because it was too vague? Is this just going to end up right back in court?
Absolutely. When you take the New York State legislature and the gun lobby, you're going to end up back in court. No matter what they did, the fact that it's coming out of New York, it's always going to be challenged. California's got the same problem, I think. It's just the nature of the legislation versus the nature of the lobby. And the courts chime in. There is a Second Amendment consideration every step of the way. And so that's a federal constitutional provision. Ultimately, I think it's going to have to be revealed by or reviewed, excuse me, by a federal court. You have this anytime you're going to have exactly what we have here. The state has the power, but there is a federal constitutional right. It's going to be a clash. And again, the review is going to come. It takes a better mind to figure out where it's going to go, what the challenges, how they'll be decided. But there will be challenges, and the court will be involved in reviewing this legislation.
Now, Peter, there's already been some uproar about the social media review component of these laws. Folks saying that they're not comfortable submitting their social media accounts to be reviewed. From a legal standpoint, do you foresee any potential First Amendment rights issues here with these gun laws?
There's certainly a First Amendment component to this, but the classic statement that you have a right to free speech, but you don't have a right to yell fire in a crowded theater. There is some amount of review even for constitutionally protected speech, and how that may implicate your fitness to have a permit or a concealed carry permit. There's a balancing act among both the constitutional rights of an individual and the right of the government to make sure that we're not giving a license, a pistol permit, to a potential mass shooter or something like that. Again, here, I don't know where it will end up. It's certainly, I understand citizens being uncomfortable about that. However, I think other citizens could as easily argue that, well, we want to know if there is someone who is that far on the fringe, who is making statements, either racist or violent racist, or violence against the government, and then they're turning around and asking for a weapon. You can see where the government and the people would have an interest in knowing that before the permit is issued. Lots to think about on this one, and again, certainly the courts are going to be weighing in. I've no doubt about that.
Now, Peter, one more component to these new round of gun laws in response to the Supreme Court ruling and some of the violence we have seen recently. You have to be 21 or older to purchase a semi-automatic rifle. There are folks, and we've heard this argument, be it on social media or in the public sphere, you could be 18 to serve in the military and handle a weapon. So some of those folks say, well, why do I have to be 21 to purchase one of these weapons? Do you foresee any legal challenges based on the age requirements?
I foresee legal challenges. You can serve in the armed forces and not drink a beer really anywhere in the country. The inconsistencies among age go throughout our law. Once again, the fact that it'll be challenged, no doubt. Every state has a different age requirement. That's a consideration as well. And because it's limited to the semi-automatics, I think the age distinction may carry more weight. It's not like you can't have any weapon whatsoever. They've limited it to the most serious, and they've only limited it another 3 years. But again, I don't pretend to be a judge on any of these things. I certainly foresee the challenges, and there's compelling arguments really on both sides to see where the court will end up on it.
Well, Peter, as these laws play out, I suspect we'll be talking to you again in the future. But in the meantime, Peter Polano, partner with Tully Reinke, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, we are going to check in on the restaurant industry, which took a big hit during the pandemic after the legislature passed new laws to help revitalize the industry. Was this summer a return to normal? We're going to break down some surprising numbers after the break. And welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Solomon Syed in Albany. Well, the COVID pandemic has hit countless of industries, some in ways just as crippling as the virus itself. But this summer was the first in nearly 3 years with minimal, if any, COVID restrictions. And with that, many businesses hoping for a bounce back. The restaurant industry boosted by two state measures in particular, a return of alcohol to go and continued street and sidewalk dining. This, of course, on top of some tax relief and funding for eateries. Well, according to an August survey from the New York State Restaurant Survey, it does not appear that summer heated up the restaurant business. 91% of restaurants surveyed say they are less profitable than they were before the pandemic. Inflation has raised prices on food and beverages, and the restaurants saying they've passed that on to you, the customer. 88% saying they have raised their menu prices. 77% have cut their hours of operation. 53% trimming their staff. And 41% say the warmer weather did not only not help business, things actually got worse than they were 3 months ago. And joining us now to help take the temperature of the restaurant and hospitality industry is Melissa Fleischut, the president and CEO of the state's Restaurant Association. Melissa, welcome back to Empire State Weekly.
Thank you, Solomon. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you, Melissa. We'll get right into it. I just gave our viewers some of these staggering responses to the survey. What's happening? Why hasn't summer produced that expected bounce back?
I think what happened was we saw so much inflation impact the industry this summer. So rising costs of just everything across the board, operating costs, labor costs, fuel costs, utilities, and wholesale food prices. And the industry has been extremely price sensitive because they don't want to scare their customers away. So all of those costs are really eating away at their ability to make money because they don't want to raise their prices too high.
Now, Melissa, we did see in the survey that more than 80% of restaurants said that they did raise prices on their menus to try to, still turn a profit, be in the black as opposed to be in the red. Is there a concern that that might be having? You said you don't want to pass the cost on to the consumer, but ultimately you have to be profitable. Is there a concern that this might be providing a chilling effect on the industry as a whole?
It could be if prices are raised too high, but what we found was that wholesale food prices increased almost double what restaurant menu prices increased. So they really aren't passing along the entire increase to the consumer, even though those menu prices have gone up.
And that, of course, leading to some of the other numbers we saw where more than 40% of restaurants say that they believe that they're in a worse position than they were when summer started. During COVID, restaurants couldn't have that indoor dining for a period. Then there was masking unless you were eating. Then there was a limit on how late you could stay open. Melissa, it doesn't take long for consumer habits to become permanent. So is there a worry that that might be the case in New York, which, of course, we know had some of the strictest COVID restrictions in the country?
Yeah, we certainly did. And, going forward, I really think it depends on the economy more than anything else. We still see that there's consumer interest in dining out and being out at restaurants and going to gatherings again. The catering industry has seen an increase in customer demand. So those are all good signs. It's just a matter of making the expense side of things work. So it really depends on when we can get the supply chain worked out, when we can get these food prices back in line. We've seen gas prices decrease in the last few months. So hopefully if we can get the other prices to realign, we'll be in a better position going forward.
Some hope that there could be some light at the end of the tunnel. Melissa, we also saw in the survey that many restaurants say that they're trimming staff, they're cutting their hours of operations to help with their bottom line. I guess my question would be, does the restaurant industry need to maybe shift the way it does business in this current climate? You talked about that. And if so, what are some of the options on the table?
Yeah, I think we saw that in the survey as well, talking about operators who have closed certain days of the week and have limited the hours of operation that they're normally open. So staffing has been a top priority, and we've been saying it over and over, we're not back to the staffing levels we were in 2019. And I think what you're seeing is restaurants that have adjusted their hours of operation to meet that and to address the days of the week that they're open to help give those employees the day off, because the employees that they have are really important to keep them happy and keep them healthy. And so making sure that they get the needed rest that they need and that they don't get overwhelmed and burnt out. So I think that's the adjustment that we've seen. 77% said they've reduced hours of operation, and 47% have closed on days that they would normally be open. So I think those are the adjustments we're seeing restaurants make for their employees.
Now, Melissa, the state has also taken a few steps to help out with this. We know there's alcohol to go, outdoor dining is continuing. There is some relief funding that got distributed. What else might the association be hoping for, be it legislatively or even just with a helpful push from the state to help get things turned around?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're really looking at every fee, every charge that we can. Can we help with the pennies at this point? The big dollar ticket items, the grants that came from the federal government really seem to be done at this point. I mean, we're going to continue to ask for, additional help from the federal government, but it doesn't seem like any additional grant funding is going to come to the industry. So, we're looking at things like the unemployment surcharge for employees that has just gotten issued so that we have to start paying back that debt on unemployment insurance that the state racked up during COVID. We're looking at the split case fee hearing with the state liquor authority coming up next week. So anything we can do, even if it seems like a small amount of money, is going to help and add up over time for the restaurant industry.
And we've had you on to talk about the split case fee. We're going to keep an eye on that too. Real quick here, it's not all doom and gloom though. 20% of restaurants surveyed here did say that things did get better over the summer, so that's a positive. What are you hearing from those businesses in terms of what's working for them and maybe what some other restaurants can learn from them too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that has a lot to do with where you're located and your summer season. Some of our restaurants, of course, are seasonal and do better in the summer months than they do elsewhere. I wouldn't be surprised to see that, our restaurants in Saratoga, for example, were doing well, hopefully Lake George. Some of our resort areas, near lakes and waters and things like that are really experiencing a better time than the rest of the restaurants in the industry right now.
And Melissa, real quick before we wrap up, is this the new normal? When will things get back to normal?
Yeah, our restaurateurs were a little bit mixed on this. So according to our survey, we saw that 42% said they thought it was going to take more than a year for things to kind of improve and shake out and get sort of back to a new normal for them. But we also saw that 39% said it was never coming back to what it was before and that we just have to move forward and find a new path. So mixed results there. And, it could go either way, I guess, at this point. We'll have to watch and see.
And obviously hoping for the best. Melissa Fleischutz, the president and CEO of the state's Restaurant Association, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Easing the frustration of finding childcare in New York. Coming up, what New York is doing to help families find affordable options. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I am Solomon Syed in Albany. Well, New York State is expanding access to childcare. Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine telling us what's being done.
New York State is still reeling from the effects of the pandemic.
New York State lost over 2,000 child care programs. And I'm not talking about slots, I'm talking about programs. And over 20,000 child care slots that were there before the pandemic when things were still really tight, those are gone now as well.
To help families struggling with child care, $7 billion was set aside in the state budget.
Thus far, we've allocated over $100 million of the funding to create nearly 12,000 new child care slots in child care deserts. So that's what we've already done. But now we're investing $2 billion into subsidies. What does the subsidy do? Well, it says to the family, you're not on your own.
The subsidies will provide $9,000 per child, and the state will broaden the eligibility for families of 4 who make up to $83,000 a year. In addition, school-age child care programs and newly licensed child care providers can apply for a second round of federally funded grants.
This is direct money to the providers so they can stay in business, so they can offer more slots, offer more jobs to more teachers, to early childhood educators. It allows them to expand facilities. It allows them to do whatever they need to get their child care center up and running.
Kristen Kerr is the executive director of the New York State Association for the Education of Young Children.
the grants that the governor just announced are a critical stopgap measure in terms of making sure that programs can stay open and remain fiscally sound. But we need, as a nation and as a state, to find a long-term solution.
A state PSA campaign will be taking place to make sure families are aware of the help they can receive for childcare. In Albany, I'm Jamie DeLine.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, stay with us. We're back with a look at the week ahead in just one moment. In the meantime, if you have a comment or story idea, let us know. You can email Empire State Weekly, and you could also find us on Twitter. And finally, here on Empire State Weekly, we are continuing to follow the back and forth over the HALT Act, which limits the use of solitary confinement in New York's prisons. Now, corrections officers spent the past week rallying in different regions to bring awareness to a reported rise in assaults on prison staff since HALT was implemented. As we continue to follow the situation, we're also hearing from advocates on this hot button issue who say they believe the HALT Act makes prisons safer in the long run. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I am Solomon Syed in Albany. We'll see you again next week. Don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's a full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across New York.